Long before that, the kingship had itself become but a name, a show. At an early day, the missionaries had turned it into something very much like a republic, and here lately, the business whites have turned it into something exactly like it. In Captain Cook's time, 1778, the native population of the islands was estimated at 400,000, in 1836 at something short of 200,000, in 1866 at 50,000. It is today, per census, 25,000. All intelligent people praise Kamehameha and Liholiho for conferring upon their people the great boon of civilization. I would do it myself, but my intelligence is out of repair now from overwork. When I was in the islands nearly a generation ago, I was acquainted with a young American couple who had among their belongings an attractive little son of the age of 7. Attractive but not practicably companionable with me, because he knew no English. He had played from his birth with the little Kanakas on his father's plantation, and had preferred their language and would learn no other. The family removed to America a month after I arrived in the islands, and straightway the boy began to lose his Kanaka and pick up English. By the time he was 12, he hadn't a word of Kanaka left. The language had wholly departed from his tongue and from his comprehension. 9 years later, when he was 21, I came upon the family in one of the lake towns of New York, and the mother told me about an adventure which her son had been having. By trade, he was now a professional diver. A passenger boat had been caught in a storm on the lake and had gone down, carrying her people with her. A few days later, the young diver descended with his armor on and entered the berth saloon of the boat and stood at the foot of the companionway, with his hand on the rail, peering through the dim water. Presently something touched him on the shoulder, and he turned and found a dead man swaying and bobbing about him and seemingly inspecting him inquiringly. He was paralyzed with fright. His entry had disturbed the water, and now he discerned a number of dim corpses making for him and wagging their heads and swaying their bodies like sleepy people trying to dance. His senses forsook him, and in that condition he was drawn to the surface. He was put to bed at home, and was soon very ill. During some days he had seasons of delirium which lasted several hours at a time, and while they lasted he talked Kanaka incessantly and glibly, and Kanaka only. He was still very ill, and he talked to me in that tongue, but I did not understand it, of course. The doctor books tell us that cases like this are not uncommon. Then the doctors ought to study the cases and find out how to multiply them. Many languages and things get mislaid in a person's head and stay mislaid for lack of this remedy. Many memories of my former visit to the islands came up in my mind while we lay at anchor in front of Honolulu that night. And pictures, 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 an enchanting procession of them. I was impatient for the morning to come. When it came, it brought disappointment, of course. Cholera had broken out in the town, and we were not allowed to have any communication with the shore. Thus suddenly did my dream of 29 years go to ruin. Messages came from friends, but the friends themselves I was not to have any sight of. My lecture hall was ready, but I was not to see that either. Several of our passengers belonged in Honolulu, and these were sent ashore, but nobody could go ashore and return. There were people on shore who were booked to go with us to Australia, but we could not receive them. To do it would cost us a quarantine term in Sydney. They could have escaped the day before by ship to San Francisco, but the bars had been put up now, and they might have to wait weeks before any ship could venture to give them a passage any whither. And there were hardships for others. An elderly lady and her son, recreation seekers from Massachusetts, had wandered westward, further and further from home, always intending to take the return track, but always concluding to go still a little further. And now here they were at anchor before Honolulu positively, their last westward-bound indulgence. They had made up their minds to that. But where is the use in making up your mind in this world? It is usually a waste of time to do it. These two would have to stay with us as far as Australia. Then they could go on around the world or go back the way they had come. The distance and the accommodations and outlay of time would be just the same, whichever of the two routes they might elect to take. Think of it, a projected excursion of 500 miles gradually enlarged, without any elaborate degree of intention, to a possible 24,000. However, they were used to extensions by this time, and did not mind this new one much. And we had with us a lawyer from Victoria, who had been sent out by the government on an international matter, and he had brought his wife with him and left the children at home with the servants, and now what was to be done? Go ashore amongst the cholera and take the risks? Most certainly not. They decided to go on to the Fiji Islands, wait there a fortnight for the next ship, and then sail for home. They couldn't foresee that they wouldn't see a homeward-bound ship again for 6 weeks, and that no word could come to them from the children, and no word go from them to the children in all that time. It is easy to make plans in this world. Even a cat can do it, And when one is out in those remote oceans, it is noticeable that a cat's plans and a man's are worth about the same. There is much the same shrinkage in both, in the matter of values. There was nothing for us to do but sit about the decks in the shade of the awnings and look at the distant shore. We lay in luminous blue water. Shoreward the water was green and brilliant. At the shore itself it broke in a long white ruffle, and with no crash, no sound that we could hear. The town was buried under a mat of foliage that looked like a cushion of moss. The silky mountains were clothed in soft, rich splendors of melting color, and some of the cliffs were veiled in slanting mists. I recognized it all. It was just as I had seen it long before, with nothing of its beauty lost, nothing of its charm wanting. A change had come, but that was political and not visible from the ship. The monarchy of my day was gone, and a republic was sitting in its seat. It was not a material change. The old imitation pomps, the fuss and feathers have departed, and the royal trademark, that is about all that one could miss, I suppose. That imitation monarchy was grotesque enough in my time. If it had held on another 30 years, it would have been a monarchy without subjects of the king's race. We had a sunset of a very fine sort. The vast plain of the sea was marked off in bands of sharply contrasted colors. Great stretches of dark blue, others of purple, others of polished bronze. The billowy mountains showed all sorts of dainty browns and greens, blues and purples and blacks, and the rounded, velvety backs of certain of them made one want to stroke them, as one would the sleek back of a cat. The long, sloping promontory projecting into the sea at the west turned dim and leaden and spectral, then became suffused with pink, dissolved itself in a pink dream, so to speak. It seemed so airy and unreal. Presently the cloud rack was flooded with fiery splendors, and these were copped on the surface of the sea, and it made one drunk with delight to look upon it. From talks with certain of our passengers whose home was Honolulu, and from a sketch by Mrs. Mary H. Kraut, I was able to perceive what the Honolulu of today is, as compared with the Honolulu of my time. In my time, it was a beautiful little town, made up of snow-white wooden cottages deliciously smothered in tropical vines and flowers and trees and shrubs, and its coral roads and streets were hard and smooth, and as white as the houses. The outside aspects of the place suggested the presence of a modest and comfortable prosperity, a general prosperity, perhaps one might strengthen the term and say universal. There were no fine houses, no fine furniture. There were no decorations. Tallow candles furnished the light for the bedrooms, a whale oil lamp furnished it for the parlor. Native matting served as carpeting. In the parlor one would find 2 or 3 lithographs on the walls, portraits as a rule, Kamehameha Roman 4, Louis Kossuth, Jenny Lind, and maybe an engraving or two. Rebecca at the well, Moses smiting the rock, Joseph's servants finding the cup in Benjamin's sack. There would be a center table with books of a tranquil sort on it. The Whole Duty of Man, Baxter's Saints, Rest, Fox's Martyrs, Tupper's Proverbial Philosophy, bound copies of the Missionary Herald and of Father Damon Seaman's Friend. A melodeon, a music stand with Willie, We Have Missed You, Star of the Evening, Roll on Silver Moon, Are We Most There, I Would Not Live Alway, and other songs of love and sentiment, together with an assortment of hymns. A whatnot with semi-globular glass paperweights, enclosing miniature pictures of ships, New England rural snowstorms, and the like. Seashells with Bible texts carved on them in cameo style, native curios, whale's tooth with full-rigged ship carved on it. There was nothing reminiscent of foreign parts, for nobody had been abroad. Trips were made to San Francisco, but that could not be called going abroad. Comprehensively speaking, nobody traveled. But Honolulu has grown wealthy since then, and of course wealth has introduced changes. Some of the old simplicities have disappeared. Here is a modern house, as pictured by Mrs. Kraut. Almost every house is surrounded by extensive lawns and gardens, enclosed by walls of volcanic stone, or by thick hedges of the brilliant hibiscus. The houses are most tastefully and comfortably furnished. The floors are either of hard wood covered with rugs or with fine Indian matting, while there is a preference, as in most warm countries, for rattan or bamboo furniture. There are the usual accessories of bric-a-brac, pictures, books, and curios from all parts of the world, for these island dwellers are indefatigable travelers. Nearly every house has what is called a lanai. It is a large apartment, roofed, floored, open on 3 sides, with a door or a draped archway opening into the drawing room. Frequently the roof is formed by the thick interlacing boughs of the hu tree, impervious to the sun and even to the rain, except in violent storms. Vines are trained about the sides, the stephanotis or some one of the countless fragrant and blossoming trailers which abound in the islands. There are also curtains of matting that may be drawn to exclude the sun or rain. The floor is bare for coolness or partially covered with rugs, and the lanai is prettily furnished with comfortable chairs, sofas, and tables loaded with flowers, or wonderful ferns in pots. The lanai is the favorite reception room, and here at any social function the musical program is given, and cakes and ices are served. Here morning callers are received, or gay riding parties, the ladies in pretty divided skirts, worn for convenience in riding astride, the universal mode adopted by Europeans and Americans, as well as by the natives. The comfort and luxury of such an apartment, especially at a seashore villa, can hardly be imagined. The soft breezes sweep across it, heavy with the fragrance of jasmine and gardenia, and through the swaying boughs of palm and mimosa there are glimpses of rugged mountains, their summits veiled in clouds, of purple sea with the white surf beating eternally against the reefs, whiter still in the yellow sunlight or the magical moonlight of the tropics. There, rugs, ices, pictures, lanais, worldly books, sinful bric-a-brac fetched from everywhere, and the ladies riding astride. These are changes, indeed. In my time the native women rode astride, but the white ones lacked the courage to adopt their wise custom. In my time ice was seldom seen in Honolulu. It sometimes came in sailing vessels from New England as ballast. And then, if there happened to be a man-o'-war in port and balls and suppers raging by consequence, the ballast was worth $600 a ton, as is evidenced by reputable tradition. But the ice machine has traveled all over the world now and brought ice within everybody's reach. In Lapland and Spitsbergen, no one uses native ice in our day, except the bears and the walruses. The bicycle is not mentioned, it was not necessary. We know that it is there without inquiring, it is everywhere. But for it, people could never have had summer homes on the summit of Mont Blanc. Before its day, property up there had but a nominal value. The ladies of the Hawaiian capital learned too late the right way to occupy a horse, too late to get much benefit from it. The riding horse is retiring from business everywhere in the world. In Honolulu, a few years from now, he will be only a tradition. We all know about Father Damien, the French priest who voluntarily forsook the world and went to the leper island of Molokai to labor among its population of sorrowful exiles who wait there, in slow-consuming misery, for death to come and release them from their troubles. And we know that the thing which he knew beforehand would happen, did happen, that he became a leper himself and died of that horrible disease. There was still another case of self-sacrifice, it appears. I asked after Billy Ragsdale, interpreter to the Parliament in my time, a half-white. He was a brilliant young fellow and very popular. As an interpreter, he would have been hard to match anywhere. He used to stand up in the Parliament and turn the English speeches into Hawaiian, and the Hawaiian speeches into English with a readiness and a volubility that were astonishing. I asked after him, and was told that his prosperous career was cut short in a sudden and unexpected way, just as he was about to marry a beautiful half-caste girl. He discovered, by some nearly invisible sign about his skin, that the poison of leprosy was in him. The secret was his own, and might be kept concealed for years, but he would not be treacherous to the girl that loved him. He would not marry her to a doom like his. And so he put his affairs in order, and went around to all his friends and bade them goodbye, and sailed in the leper ship to Molokai. There he died the loathsome and lingering death that all lepers die. In this place let me insert a paragraph or two from The Paradise of the Pacific, Rev. H. H. Goen. Poor lepers, it is easy for those who have no relatives or friends among them to enforce the decree of segregation to the letter. But who can write of the terrible, the heartbreaking scenes which that enforcement has brought about? A man upon Hawaii was suddenly taken away after a summary arrest, leaving behind him a helpless wife about to give birth to a babe. The devoted wife, with great pain and risk, came the whole journey to Honolulu, and pleaded, until the authorities were unable to resist her entreaty, that she might go and live like a leper with her leper husband. A woman in the prime of life and activity is condemned as an incipient leper, suddenly removed from her home, and her husband returns to find his two helpless babes moaning for their lost mother. Imagine it, the case of the babies is hard, but its bitterness is a trifle, less than nothing, compared to what the mother must suffer. And suffer minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, month by month, year by year, without respite, relief, or any abatement of her pain till she dies. One woman, Luka Kayukau, has been living with her leper husband in the settlement for 12 years. The man has scarcely a joint left, his limbs are only distorted ulcerated stumps. For 4 years his wife has put every particle of food into his mouth. He wanted his wife to abandon his wretched carcass long ago, as she herself was sound and well, but Luca said that she was content to remain and wait on the man she loved till the spirit should be freed from its burden. I myself have known hard cases enough. Of a girl, apparently in full health, decorating the church with me at Easter, who before Christmas is taken away as a confirmed leper, of a mother hiding her child in the mountains for years so that not even her dearest friends knew that she had a child alive, that he might not be taken away, of a respectable white man taken away from his wife and family, and compelled to become a dweller in the leper settlement, where he is counted dead, even by the insurance companies. And one great pity of it all is that these poor sufferers are innocent. The leprosy does not come of sins which they committed, but of sins committed by their ancestors, who escaped the curse of leprosy. Mr. Gowan has made record of a certain very striking circumstance. Would you expect to find in that awful leper settlement a custom worthy to be transplanted to your own country? They have one such, and it is inexpressibly touching and beautiful. When death sets open the prison door of life there, the band salutes the freed soul with a burst of glad music. Chapter 4. A dozen direct censures are easier to bear than one morganatic compliment. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. Sailed from Honolulu, from diary. Sept 2 flocks of flying fish slim, shapely, graceful, and intensely white. With the sun on them, they look like a flight of silver fruit knives. They are able to fly 100 yards. Sept 3, in 9 deg, 50 north latitude at breakfast, approaching the equator on a long slant. Those of us who have never seen the equator are a good deal excited. I think I would rather see it than any other thing in the world. We entered the doldrums last night, variable winds, bursts of rain, intervals of calm, with chopping seas and a wobbly and drunken motion to the ship. A condition of things findable in other regions sometimes, but present in the doldrums always. The globe-girdling belt called the doldrums is 20 degrees wide, and the thread called the equator lies along the middle of it. Sept 4, total eclipse of the moon last night. At 7:30 it began to go off. At total, or about that, it was like a rich rosy cloud with a tumbled surface framed in the circle and projecting from it, a bulge of strawberry ice, so to speak. At half eclipse the moon was like a gilded acorn in its cup. Sept 5, closing in on the equator this noon. A sailor explained to a young girl that the ship's speed is poor because we are climbing up the bulge toward the center of the globe, but that when we should once get over at the equator and start downhill, we should fly. When she asked him the other day what the foreyard was, he said it was the front yard, the open area in the front end of the ship. That man has a good deal of learning stored up, and the girl is likely to get it all. Afternoon crossed the equator. In the distance, it looked like a blue ribbon stretched across the ocean. Several passengers kodaked it. We had no fool ceremonies, no fantastics, no horseplay. All that sort of thing has gone out. In old times, a sailor, dressed as Neptune, used to come in over the bows with his suite and lather up and shave everybody who was crossing the equator for the first time, and then cleanse these unfortunates by swinging them from the yardarm and ducking them 3 times in the sea. This was considered funny. Nobody knows why. No, that is not true. We do know why. Such a thing could never be funny on land. No part of the old-time grotesque performances gotten up on shipboard to celebrate the passage of the line could ever be funny on shore. They would seem dreary and witless to shore people. But the shore people would change their minds about it at sea, on a long voyage. On such a voyage, with its eternal monotonies, people's intellects deteriorate. The owners of the intellects soon reach a point where they almost seem to prefer childish things to things of a maturer degree. One is often surprised at the juvenilities which grown people indulge in at sea, and the interest they take in them, and the consuming enjoyment they get out of them. This is on long voyages only. The mind gradually becomes inert, dull, blunted. It loses its accustomed interest in intellectual things. Nothing but horseplay can rouse it. Nothing but wild and foolish grotesqueries can entertain it. On short voyages, it makes no such exposure of itself. It hasn't time to slump down to this sorrowful level. The short voyage passenger gets his chief physical exercise out of horse billiards, shovelboard. It is a good game. We play it in this ship. A quartermaster chalks off a diagram like this on the deck. The player uses a cue that is like a broom handle with a quarter-moon of wood fastened to the end of it. With this, he shoves wooden discs the size of a saucer. He gives the disc a vigorous shove and sends it 15 or 20 feet along the deck and lands it in one of the squares if he can. If it stays there till the inning is played out, it will count as many points in the game as the figure in the square it has stopped and represents. The adversary plays to knock that disc out and leave his own in its place, particularly if it rests upon the 9 or 10 or some other of the high numbers. But if it rests in the 10 off, he backs it up, lands his disc behind it a foot or two, to make it difficult for its owner to knock it out of that damaging place and improve his record. When the inning is played out, it may be found that each adversary has placed his 4 discs where they count. It may be found that some of them are touching chalk lines and not counting. And very often it will be found that there has been a general wreckage and that not a disc has been left within the diagram. Anyway, the result is recorded, whatever it is, and the game goes on. The game is 100 points, and it takes from 20 minutes to 40 to play it, according to luck and the condition of the sea. It is an exciting game, and the crowd of spectators furnish abundance of applause for fortunate shots and plenty of laughter for the other kind. It is a game of skill, but at the same time, the uneasy motion of the ship is constantly interfering with skill. This makes it a chancy game, and the element of luck comes largely in. We had a couple of grand tournaments to determine who should be champion of the Pacific. They included among the participants nearly all the passengers, of both sexes, and the officers of the ship, and they afforded many days of stupendous interest and excitement, and murderous exercise, for horse billiards is a physically violent game. The figures in the following record of some of the closing games in the first tournament will show, better than any description, how very chancy the game is. The losers here represented had all been winners in the previous games of the series, some of them by fine majorities. Chase, 102 misses. D, 57 Mortimer, 105 The Surgeon, 92. Missy, 105 misses. T, 9 Clemens, 101 Taylor, 92. Taylor, 109 Davies, 95 Miss C, 108 Mortimer, 55. Thomas, 102 Roper, 76 Clemens, 111 Miss C, 89. Coomer, 106 Chase, 98. And so on until but 3 couples of winners were left. Then I beat my man, young Smith beat his man, and Thomas beat his. This reduced the combatants to 3. Smith and I took the deck, and I led off. At the close of the first inning, I was 10 worse than nothing, and Smith had scored. The luck continued against me. When I was 57, Smith was 97, within 3 of out. The luck changed then. He picked up a 10 off or so and couldn't recover. I beat him. The next game would end tournament number 1. Mr. Thomas and I were the contestants. He won the lead and went to the bat, so to speak. And there he stood, with the crotch of his cue resting against his disc while the ship rose slowly up, sank slowly down, rose again, sank again. She never seemed to rise to suit him exactly. She started up once more, and when she was nearly ready for the turn, he let drive and landed his disc just within the left-hand end of the 10. Applause. The umpire proclaimed a goo, and the gamekeeper set it down. I played. My disc grazed the edge of Mr. Thomas's disc and went out of the diagram. No applause. Mr. Thomas played again and landed his second disc alongside of the first and almost touching its right-hand side. Goo! Great applause. I played and missed both of them. No applause. Mr. Thomas delivered his third shot and landed his disc just at the right of the other 2. Goo! Immense applause. There they lay, side by side, the 3 in a row. It did not seem possible that anybody could miss them. Still I did it. Immense silence. Mr. Thomas played his last disc. It seems incredible, but he actually landed that disc alongside of the others, and just to the right of them, a straight solid row of 4 discs. Tumultuous and long-continued applause. Then I played my last disc. Again, it did not seem possible that anybody could miss that row, a row which would have been 14 inches long if the discs had been clamped together, whereas, with the spaces separating them, they made a longer row than that. But I did it. It may be that I was getting nervous. I think it unlikely that that innings has ever had its parallel in the history of horse billiards. To place the 4 discs side by side in the 10 was an extraordinary feat. Indeed, it was a kind of miracle. To miss them was another miracle. It will take a century to produce another man who can place the 4 discs in the 10, and longer than that to find a man who can't knock them out. I was ashamed of my performance at the time, but now that I reflect upon it, I see that it was rather fine and difficult. Mr. Thomas kept his luck and won the game and later the championship. In a minor tournament, I won the prize, which was a Waterbury watch. I put it in my trunk. In Pretoria, South Africa, 9 months afterward, my proper watch broke down and I took the Waterbury out, wound it, set it by the great clock on the Parliament House, 8:05, then went back to my room and went to bed, tired from a long railway journey. The parliamentary clock had a peculiarity which I was not aware of at the time, a peculiarity which exists in no other clock, and would not exist in that one if it had been made by a sane person. On the half hour, it strikes the succeeding hour, then strikes the hour again at the proper time. I lay reading and smoking a while. Then, when I could hold my eyes open no longer and was about to put out the light, the great clock began to boom, and I counted 10. I reached for the Waterbury to see how it was getting along. It was marking 9:30. It seemed rather poor speed for a $3 watch, but I supposed that the climate was affecting it. I shoved it half an hour ahead and took to my book and waited to see what would happen. At 10, the great clock struck 10 again. I looked. The Waterbury was marking 10:30. This was too much speed for the money, and it troubled me. I pushed the hands back a half hour and waited once more. I had to, for I was vexed and restless now, and my sleepiness was gone. By and by the great clock struck 11. The Waterbury was marking 10:30. I pushed it ahead half an hour with some show of temper. By and by the great clock struck 11 again. The Waterbury showed up 11:30 now, and I beat her brains out against the bedstead. I was sorry next day when I found out. To return to the ship. The average human being is a perverse creature, and when he isn't that, he is a practical joker. The result to the other person concerned is about the same, that is, he is made to suffer. The washing down of the decks begins at a very early hour in all ships. In but few ships are any measures taken to protect the passengers, either by waking or warning them, or by sending a steward to close their ports. And so the deckwashers have their opportunity, and they use it. They send a bucket of water slashing along the side of the ship and into the ports, drenching the passenger's clothes, and often the passenger himself. This good old custom prevailed in this ship, and under unusually favorable circumstances, for in the blazing tropical regions a removable zinc thing like a sugar shovel projects from the port to catch the wind and bring it in. This thing catches the wash water and brings it in, too, and in flooding abundance. Mrs. I, an invalid, had to sleep on the locker, sofa under her port, and every time she overslept and thus failed to take care of herself, the deckwashers drowned her out. And the painters, what a good time they had. This ship would be going into dock for a month in Sydney for repairs, but no matter, painting was going on all the time somewhere or other. The ladies' dresses were constantly getting ruined, nevertheless protests and supplications went for nothing. Sometimes a lady, taking an afternoon nap on deck near a ventilator, or some other thing that didn't need painting, would wake up by and find that the humorous painter had been noiselessly daubing that thing, and had splattered her white gown all over with little greasy yellow spots. The blame for this untimely painting did not lie with the ship's officers, but with custom. As far back as Noah's time, it became law that ships must be constantly painted and fussed at when at sea. Custom grew out of the law, and at sea, custom knows no death. This custom will continue until the sea goes dry. Sept 8, Sunday. We are moving so nearly south that we cross only about 2 meridians of longitude a day. This morning we were in longitude 178 west from Greenwich and degrees west from San Francisco. Tomorrow we shall be close to the center of the globe, the 180th degree of west longitude, nth degree of east longitude. And then we must drop out a day, lose a day out of our lives, a day never to be found again. We shall all die one day earlier than from the beginning of time we were foreordained to die. We shall be a day behindhand all through eternity. We shall always be saying to the other angels, "Fine day today," and they will be always retorting, "But it isn't today, it's tomorrow." We shall be in a state of confusion all the time and shall never know what true happiness is. Next day, sure enough, it has happened. Yesterday it was September 8, Sunday. Today, per the bulletin board at the head of the companionway, it is September 10, Tuesday. There is something uncanny about it, and uncomfortable. In fact, nearly unthinkable and wholly unrealizable when one comes to consider it. While we were crossing the 180th meridian, it was Sunday in the stern of the ship where my family were, and Tuesday in the bow where I was. They were there eating the half of a fresh apple on the 8th, and I was at the same time eating the other half of it on the 10th. And I could notice how stale it was already. The family were the same age that they were when I had left them 5 minutes before, but I was a day older now than I was then. The day they were living in stretched behind them halfway round the globe, across the Pacific Ocean and America and Europe. The day I was living in stretched in front of me around the other half to meet it. They were stupendous days for bulk and stretch, apparently much larger days than we had ever been in before. All previous days had been but shrunk-up little things by comparison. The difference in temperature between the 2 days was very marked, their day being hotter than mine because it was closer to the equator. Along about the moment that we were crossing the Great Meridian, a child was born in the steerage, and now there is no way to tell which day it was born on. The nurse thinks it was Sunday, the surgeon thinks it was Tuesday. The child will never know its own birthday. It will always be choosing first one and then the other, and will never be able to make up its mind permanently. This will breed vacillation and uncertainty in its opinions about religion, and politics, and business, and sweethearts, and everything, and will undermine its principles and rot them away, and make the poor thing characterless, and its success in life impossible. Everyone in the ship says so. And this is not all, in fact, not the worst. For there is an enormously rich brewer in the ship who said as much as 10 days ago that if the child was born on his birthday, he would give it $10,000 to start its little life with. His birthday was Monday, the 9th of September. If the ships all moved in the one direction, westward I mean, the world would suffer a prodigious loss, in the matter of valuable time, through the dumping overboard on the great meridian of such multitudes of days by ships' crews and passengers. But fortunately the ships do not all sail west, half of them sail east. So there is no real loss. These latter pick up all the discarded days and add them to the world's stock again, and about as good as new too, for of course the salt water preserves them. Chapter 5. Noise proves nothing. Often a hen who has merely laid an egg cackles as if she had laid an asteroid. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. Wednesday, Sept. 11. In this world we often make mistakes of judgment. We do not as a rule get out of them sound and whole, but sometimes we do. At dinner yesterday evening present, a mixture of Scotch, English, American, Canadian, and Australasian folk, a discussion broke out about the pronunciation of certain Scottish words. This was private ground, and the non-Scotch nationalities, with one exception, discreetly kept still. But I am not discreet, and I took a hand. I didn't know anything about the subject, but I took a hand just to have something to do. At that moment the word in dispute was the word three. One Scotchman was claiming that the peasantry of Scotland pronounced it three, his adversaries claimed that they didn't, that they pronounced it thraw. The solitary Scot was having a sultry time of it, so I thought I would enrich him with my help. In my position I was necessarily quite impartial, and was equally as well and as ill-equipped to fight on the one side as on the other. So I spoke up and said the peasantry pronounced the word three, not thraw. It was an error of judgment. There was a moment of astonished and ominous silence, then weather ensued. The storm rose and spread in a surprising way, and I was snowed under in a very few minutes. It was a bad defeat for me, a kind of Waterloo. It promised to remain so, and I wished I had had better sense than to enter upon such a forlorn enterprise. But just then I had a saving thought, at least a thought that offered a chance. While the storm was still raging, I made up a Scotch couplet and then spoke up and said, "Very well, don't say any more, I confess defeat. I thought I knew, but I see my mistake. I was deceived by one of your Scotch poets." A Scotch poet, oh come name him. Robert Burns. It is wonderful the power of that name. These men looked doubtful, but paralyzed all the same. They were quite silent for a moment. Then one of them said, with the reverence in his voice which is always present in a Scotchman's tone when he utters the name. "Does Robbie Burns say, what does he say?" This is what he says. "There were nae bairns, but only three. Ane at the breast, twa at the knee." It ended the discussion. There was no man there profane enough, disloyal enough, to say any word against a thing which Robert Burns had settled. I shall always honor that great name for the salvation it brought me in this time of my sore need. It is my belief that nearly any invented quotation, played with confidence, stands a good chance to deceive. There are people who think that honesty is always the best policy. This is a superstition. There are times when the appearance of it is worth six of it. We are moving steadily southward, getting further and further down under the projecting paunch of the globe. Yesterday evening, we saw the Big Dipper and the North Star sink below the horizon and disappear from our world. No, not we. But they saw it, somebody saw it and told me about it. But it is no matter, I was not caring for those things, I am tired of them anyway. I think they are well enough, but one doesn't want them always hanging around. My interest was all in the Southern Cross. I had never seen that. I had heard about it all my life, and it was but natural that I should be burning to see it. No other constellation makes so much talk. I had nothing against the Big Dipper, and naturally couldn't have anything against it, since it is a citizen of our own sky, and the property of the United States, but I did want it to move out of the way and give this foreigner a chance. Judging by the size of the talk which the Southern Cross had made, I supposed it would need a sky all to itself. Yeah. But that was a mistake. We saw the cross tonight, and it is not large and not strikingly bright, but it was low down toward the horizon, and it may improve when it gets up higher in the sky. It is ingeniously named, for it looks just as a cross would look if it looked like something else. But that description does not describe. It is too vague, too general, too indefinite. It does after a fashion suggest a cross that is out of repair or out of drawing, not correctly shaped. It is long with a short crossbar, and the crossbar is canted out of the straight line. It consists of 4 large stars and one little one. The little one is out of line and further damages the shape. It should have been placed at the intersection of the stem and the crossbar. If you do not draw an imaginary line from star to star, it does not suggest a cross, nor anything in particular. One must ignore the little star and leave it out of the combination. It confuses everything. If you leave it out, then you can make out of the 4 stars a sort of cross out of true, or a sort of kite out of true, or a sort of coffin out of true. Constellations have always been troublesome things to name. If you give one of them a fanciful name, it will always refuse to live up to it. It will always persist in not resembling the thing it has been named for. Ultimately, to satisfy the public, the fanciful name has to be discarded for a common sense one, a manifestly descriptive one. The Great Bear remained the Great Bear, and unrecognizable as such, for thousands of years, and people complained about it all the time, and quite properly. But as soon as it became the property of the United States, Congress changed it to the Big Dipper, and now everybody is satisfied, and there is no more talk about riots. I would not change the Southern Cross to the Southern Coffin, I would change it to the Southern Kite. For up there in the general emptiness is the proper home of a kite, but not for coffins and crosses and dippers. In a little while now, I cannot tell exactly how long it will be. The globe will belong to the English-speaking race, and of course the skies also. Then the constellations will be reorganized and polished up and renamed, the most of them Victoria, I reckon, but this one will sail thereafter as the Southern Kite, or go out of business. Several towns and things, here and there, have been named for Her Majesty already. In these past few days we are plowing through a mighty Milky Way of islands. They are so thick on the map that one would hardly expect to find room between them for a canoe, yet we seldom glimpse one. Once we saw the dim bulk of a couple of them, far away, spectral and dreamy things, members of the Hornalofa and Fortuna. On the larger one are 2 rival native kings, and they have a time together. They are Catholics, so are their people. The missionaries, there are French priests. From the multitudinous islands in these regions, the recruits for the Queensland plantations were formerly drawn, are still drawn from them, I believe. Vessels fitted up like old-time slavers came here and carried off the natives to serve as laborers in the great Australian province. In the beginning, it was plain, simple man-stealing, as per testimony of the missionaries. This has been denied, but not disproven. Afterward, it was forbidden by law to recruit a native without his consent, and governmental agents were sent in all recruiting vessels to see that the law was obeyed, which they did, according to the recruiting people, and which they sometimes didn't, according to the missionaries. A man could be lawfully recruited for a 3 years term of service. He could volunteer for another term if he so chose. When his time was up, he could return to his island, and would also have the means to do it, for the government required the employer to put money in its hands for this purpose before the recruit was delivered to him. Captain Juan was a recruiting shipmaster during many years. From his pleasant book one gets the idea that the recruiting business was quite popular with the islanders, as a rule. And yet that did not make the business wholly dull and uninteresting, for one finds rather frequent little breaks in the monotony of it, like this, for instance. The afternoon of our arrival at Leper Island, the schooner was lying almost becalmed under the lee of the lofty central portion of the island, about 3/4 of a mile from the shore. The boats were in sight at some distance. The recruiter boat had run into a small nook on the rocky coast, under a high bank, above which stood a solitary hut backed by dense forest. The government agent and mate in the second boat lay about 400 yards to the westward. Suddenly we heard the sound of firing, followed by yells from the natives on shore, and then we saw the recruiter boat push out with a seemingly diminished crew. The mate's boat pulled quickly up, took her in tow, and presently brought her alongside, all her own crew being more or less hurt. It seems the natives had called them into the place on pretense of friendship. A crowd gathered about the stern of the boat, and several fellows even got into her. All of a sudden our men were attacked with clubs and tomahawks. The recruiter escaped the first blows aimed at him, making play with his fists until he had an opportunity to draw his revolver. Tom Sayers, a mere man, received a tomahawk blow on the head which laid the scalp open but did not penetrate his skull, fortunately. Bobby Towns, another mere boatman, had both his thumbs cut in warding off blows, one of them being so nearly severed from the hand that the doctors had to finish the operation. Lihu, a Lifu boy, the recruiter's special attendant, was cut and pricked in various places, but nowhere seriously. Jack, an unlucky Tana recruit who had been engaged to act as boatman, received an arrow through his forearm, the head of which, a piece of bone 7 or 8 inches long, was still in the limb, protruding from both sides when the boats returned. The recruiter himself would have got off scot-free had not an arrow pinned one of his fingers to the loom of the steering oar just as they were getting off. The fight had been short but sharp. The enemy lost 2 men, both shot dead. The truth is, Captain Juan furnishes such a crowd of instances of fatal encounters between natives and French and English recruiting crews. For the French are in the business for the plantations of New Caledonia, that one is almost persuaded that recruiting is not thoroughly popular among the islanders. Else why this bristling string of attacks and blood-curdling slaughter? The captain lays it all to Exeter Hall influence. But for the meddling philanthropists, the native fathers and mothers would be fond of seeing their children carted into exile, and now, and then the grave, instead of weeping about it and trying to kill the kind recruiters. In Chapter 6, he was as shy as a newspaper is when referring to its own merits. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. Captain Juan is crystal clear on one point. He does not approve of missionaries. They obstruct his business. They make recruiting, as he calls it, slave catching, as they call it in their frank way, a trouble when it ought to be just a picnic and a pleasure excursion. The missionaries have their opinion about the manner in which the labor traffic is conducted, and about the recruiters' evasions of the law of the traffic, and about the traffic itself. And it is distinctly uncomplimentary to the traffic, and to everything connected with it, including the law for its regulation. Captain Juan's book is of very recent date. I have by me a pamphlet of still later date, hot from the press, in fact, by Rev. W.M. Gray, a missionary, and the book and the pamphlet taken together make exceedingly interesting reading, to my mind. Interesting and easy to understand, except in one detail which I will mention presently. It is easy to understand why the Queensland sugar planter should want the Kanaka recruit. He is cheap. Very cheap, in fact. These are the figures paid by the planter. £20 to the recruiter for getting the Kanaka, or catching him, as the missionary phrase goes. £3 to the Queensland government for superintending the importation. £5 deposited with the government for the Kanakas. Passage home when his 3 years are up, in case he shall live that long. About £25 to the Kanaka himself for 3 years' wages and clothing. Total payment for the use of a man 3 years, £53, or, including diet, £60. Altogether, $100 a year. One can understand why the recruiter is fond of the business. The recruit costs him a few cheap presents, given to the recruit's relatives, not to the recruit himself, and the recruit is worth £20 to the recruiter when delivered in Queensland. All this is clear enough, but the thing that is not clear is what there is about it all to persuade the recruit. He is young and brisk. Life at home in his beautiful island is one lazy, long holiday to him, or if he wants to work he can turn out a couple of bags of copper per week and sell it for 4 or 5 shillings a bag. In Queensland he must get up at dawn and work from 8 to 12 hours a day in the cane fields, in a much hotter climate than he is used to, and get less than 4 shillings a week for it. I cannot understand his willingness to go to Queensland. It is a deep puzzle to me. Here is the explanation, from the planter's point of view. At least I gather from the missionary's pamphlet that it is the planter S.